Welcome back, everyone. Please have a seat. Well, as Mr. Turnbull said today, we have stopped debating if green hydrogen can save us. We all know green hydrogen is the missing link. And now we are debating how quickly we can make it happen. My name is Nienke Holman, and I'm a former regional minister from the Northern Netherlands. It is a region where we were hit by earthquakes due to the natural gas mining. So we really were in a hurry to transform from natural gas extraction to a green hydrogen economy. And we did it together. We made an investment plan and an investment agenda together with our industry, our knowledge institutes and governments. And together we made it happen. We built a hydrogen valley, and we were appointed as the first hydrogen valley in Europe. We really kickstarted the hydrogen economy in our region. And today was mentioned, it is all about connecting the dots. It's not only about connecting the dots in the value chain, from production, storage, transport to demand, but it's also about connecting the dots between hydrogen valleys. And that's what I do now. I'm CEO of Impact Hydrogen, building hydrogen valleys all over the world. And I'm also president of the Sustainable Hydrogen Club. So I'm extra curious to know about the forecast, and perhaps you are all. So today we have a wonderful panel, and we start today with a presentation of Mr. Bhavnagri from Bloomberg. I will invite you to the floor in a minute. Oh, in a minute. Sorry. Because we have more panelists, and they will all give a short presentation and some remarks to your presentation. So Lord Adair Turner, Chair of the Energy Transitions Commission, and we have Francesco Lacamara, the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, and Mr. Frankel, the Head of Renewable Energy Division at the International Energy Agency. So please now, I invite you to give the presentation of the forecast, the market forecast of green hydrogen.
Thank you very much, Nienke, and I appreciate you pronouncing my last name correct. That's quite an endeavor. And a real pleasure to be here in front of all of you and to follow two of my other great Australian colleagues, Malcolm Turnbull and Andrew Forrest, to represent the land down under. So I'll be giving you a brief synopsis of the outlook for green hydrogen based on our research, with an overall message really about growth and the need for that growth to happen at a rapid pace. Firstly, for the uninitiated, Bloomberg NEF, we're a research house that specialises in providing data, news, intelligence, analysis on the energy transition. We have a team that's dedicated to analysing hydrogen, of which the work I'll be presenting today, but many other teams that focus on all of the technologies, the policies, company strategies, etc., that govern the energy transition and help our clients to make better decisions. And very pleased to work with some of the biggest and most important companies in the global economy, as well as the global energy industry, many of which are represented in this room, and very pleased to share our work with you today. So I'll start with this picture, a picture where we can draw some inspiration from nature. This stuff here is called duckweed. It's that funny leafy substance that in Europe in particular, you often see choking up canals, slow-flowing rivers, ponds, waterways. And for many of the folks that pull boats through these canals, it's regarded as a bit of a pest. You can try and remove it and get rid of it, and all of a sudden it blankets the canal again. And that's because scientists recently discovered that duckweed is the fastest growing plant in the world. It can grow at a rather remarkable rate of doubling in size every 2 to 3 days. And the rate at which things double is extremely important in our industry, in energy. The rate of doubling that we have seen in solar, in wind, in battery technology has changed energy economics. Because every time solar capacity has doubled, we've seen the cost of photovoltaic modules fall by 29%. That's 14% for every doubling of wind and 18% for every doubling of batteries. And these industries have doubled quite quickly. Solar has doubled many times over the last decade. Wind slightly slower, but batteries have doubled almost every year for the last decade. And that phenomenal growth has meant that prices of battery equipment have fallen almost like a stone. Now, electrolyzers are at the early stage of that journey, but they have begun doubling too. From 2020 to 2021, we saw annual installations grow from 200 to over 400 megawatts. And this year, we project that total installations of electrolyzers should tip to over 2 gigawatts. And interestingly, the vast majority, the lion's share of those electrolyzers will be of the alkaline technology type. Now, those installations are driven predominantly by China. Almost 80% of that capacity should be installed in China, mostly by Chinese state-owned enterprises, who, despite really a lack of supportive government policy at the national level, are getting on with the job, making investment decisions and building 100 megawatt scale electrolyzers to really show alignment with the central government's net zero pledge. The US and Australia rank second and third quite distantly, and you can see that Europe isn't even in the top 3. So Europe has some work to do in actually putting electrolyzers on the ground. On manufacturing capacity, we can see that manufacturers around the world are expecting even more capacity to happen. We count that there's about 6 gigawatts worth of capacity available for production of electrolyzers, and that should grow rapidly with a fairly even split between the jurisdictions, so the major regions, or at least more equal than the current electrolyzer pipeline. And again, we can see that alkaline electrolyzer technology has the dominant share of that pipeline. Another facet of the green hydrogen or the hydrogen space that we have seen rapidly grow is funding commitments. Just a few years ago, there was only about $100 million worth, well, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of funding on the table for hydrogen deployment and research. But now, by our count, there is over $100 billion of funding allocated to the deployment of low carbon hydrogen. That's hydrogen really of all colors, as well as for hydrogen use. And the European Union is leading in that regard. And as demand for electrolyzers and deployment scales up, of course, we should expect prices to fall. The experience curve for electrolyzers is difficult to analyze, but it probably sits at around 20%. So every time installations double, prices should fall by 20%. But there is actually a more important dynamic, we think, that is really going to drive cost reductions of electrolyzers, and that's competition between the West and China. As you can see on this graphic, Chinese electrolyzers are currently just a quarter of the price of electrolyzers sold in Western markets, and those prices should continue to fall. We expect that we could see cost reductions of up to 50% in the price of electrolyzers by the year 2025, so some fairly handsome reductions. And what is really driving that is illustrated by this graphic. That huge discrepancy, this massive delta that we see between Western electrolyzer costs and Chinese equipment costs really has to close. There is really no option for Western electrolyzer manufacturers. If they are unable to catch up with their Chinese competitors, then we're likely to see the electrolyzer manufacturing industry go the direction of solar, which is almost entirely dominated by Chinese manufacturers. And in the long term, this competition, as well as scale up, should lead to electrolyzer prices that trend towards $100 a kilowatt. So a rapid and almost a tenfold reduction from current prices. Now, that reduction in equipment costs paired with the continual reduction in the price of renewable power should see renewable hydrogen costs around the world trend towards a benchmark of $2 per kilogram by the year 2030 and $1 per kilogram by the year 2050. And of course, some countries will be even better than that, while countries like Japan and Korea are likely to be a little bit more expensive. But this fall in renewable hydrogen costs is, of course, critical to its competition with other types of hydrogen and with fossil fuels. When it comes to competition with other forms of low carbon hydrogen, we think that green hydrogen should be cost competitive and indeed undercut the price of so-called blue hydrogen in all parts of the world by the year 2030. So that's a really significant tipping point, because it means that a blue hydrogen facility that may be built today could be structurally undercut on cost by a new green hydrogen facility that could be built right next to it by the year 2028 in many parts of the world, at latest the year 2030. And that tipping point, that point about competition, raises a serious problem for potential investments in so-called blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen could essentially become, assets could essentially become white elephants. And underscoring the nature of that problem is blue hydrogen's sensitivity to the fuel price. As fuel prices go up for natural gas, the price of blue hydrogen goes up. And at the sorts of green hydrogen prices that we're talking about, a blue hydrogen facility would need to be procuring gas at negative cost in order to compete with green hydrogen, a clearly implausible scenario. So investors in blue hydrogen facilities need to think very hard about this competition, and producers of natural gas that may be hoping for conversion to hydrogen to give their assets continual life really need to think again. And this dynamic, this price dynamic, the vulnerability of blue hydrogen and hydrogen production to fossil fuel prices is, of course, underscored and illustrated by the current situation, where extreme natural gas prices in Europe and Asia, driven by a variety of factors, not least the war in Ukraine, means that the current cost of producing ammonia from natural gas is on par with the cost of producing green ammonia from green hydrogen. Now, this may be a temporary phenomena if natural gas prices correct, but it underscores again the volatility and the vulnerability that fossil fuel hydrogen production has. Now, where are we in terms of the pipeline? We count that there's about 189 gigawatts of electrolyzer projects in the pipeline, with a degree of credibility to their announcement. About 116 gigawatts of that is proposed to be online before or by the year 2030. That pipeline of electrolyzer projects could be enough to produce around 12 million metric tons of hydrogen by the year 2030, or nearly 19 million metric tons if you take a more optimistic view of longer dated projects. Now, that's a fairly handsome rate of growth for hydrogen production, but it is, of course, well short of what we need to, where we need to be to achieve a trajectory of limiting warming to 2, let alone closer to 1.5 degrees, and well short of the target just announced by the Green Hydrogen Organization today of 100 million metric tons by the year 2030. Now, what would it take to get there to 100 million metric tons? By our count, it would take about 1,000 gigawatts of electrolyzers. That's taking an average capacity factor of about 53%, which is the average capacity factor that we see in disclosed projects in the pipeline today. Getting to 1,000 gigawatts of cumulative installed capacity would require annual installations of electrolyzers to rise from 2 gigawatts to 500 gigawatts by the year 2030. And getting there, achieving that sort of ramp, would require electrolyzer installations to double year upon year from now until 2030, 9 continuous doublings. Now, there is precedent for scale up in industries of this type, doubling year upon year. Batteries, as I mentioned, have done that in the last decade. And perhaps the most famous example is the ramp up in aircraft manufacturing during World War II. When the United States entered the war in 1941, it produced just 6,000 aircraft per year. President Roosevelt issued a challenge to US industry to be able to double that year upon year. And they were very successful, producing over 100,000 aircraft by the end of the war in 1945. So ramp ups of this scale can be done, but they require the world and the economy to adopt a warlike footing. And of course, 2030 is not the end of it. demand for clean hydrogen could grow more rapidly and would need to if we're to contain temperature rises to below 2 degrees. There are a variety of ways in which we could get there, and total demand for hydrogen will depend on what role different technologies play and also the speed at which we are able to limit carbon dioxide emissions. If in a scenario where green hydrogen and renewables play the dominant role at decarbonizing the global economy, demand for hydrogen could be as high as 1,200 million metric tons by the year 2050, more doublings ahead. If nuclear plays a large role, or post-combustion carbon capture, the role for green hydrogen or hydrogen could be a bit smaller. Now, the truth is likely to lie somewhere in between these extreme scenarios, but either way, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of metric tons. So the question really, and the reflection that I'll leave all of you in the audience, is how fast can you grow, and how much can you support a year-on-year doubling of this industry? Thanks very much.
Thank you. Wow. Well, it's sure that a new economy requires new rules. So please, Lord Adair Turner, can you give some reflections from the Energy Transitions Commissions on this outlook, please?
Well, thank you, Ninka. I mean, the question that I've been asked is, how does this compare with the ETC forecast? So with the Energy Transition Commission forecast. So I'd like to talk about some similarities, some differences, and then to make 4 points about implications that come out of both what Kobad has said and what I will say. First, however, Ninka, you suggested I should very quickly say what the Energy Transition Commission is, because not everybody may know it. We are a global coalition of about 50 companies. We work across the world, in Europe, in India, in China, US, Japan, sister organizations in Canada and Australia. And we are all united in the belief that we have got to get to a zero carbon economy by 2050 globally. We have been working for 6 years, and I think we can claim to have become quite an expert and an authoritative source of information about the technologies which will take us to net zero and the economics and policies of getting there. So among the reports that we have produced as part of that, and among the technologies which we consider absolutely vital, is hydrogen. And we produced a report in April last year called Making the Hydrogen Economy Possible. And in that report, we set out projections, which we can compare with BNEF's projections, on how rapidly green hydrogen, total hydrogen, and green hydrogen would develop. We were quite optimistic, but I think even today we would be more optimistic than we were in April last year. In particular, in April last year, we were talking about a future for hydrogen in which about 85% we thought would come in the long term from the green route, not the blue route. And I suspect we would now increase that 85% still more. But in relation to the overall shape of demand, if I can just move to the next slide, I think what we said last year still broadly stands. So how does it compare with the slide, the final slide you saw from BNEF? Our total in the green hydrogen dominated scenario is 500 to 800 million tons by 2050. So that is a bit less than the 1,400 million tons on the left-hand side of the chart you saw a few minutes ago. But it's interesting that the difference between the two charts, between the BNEF green scenario and our main scenario, is entirely dominated by that blue area that you might remember on the top of Kobad's slide, which was the development of green hydrogen within the power sector as a storage device. And I think, frankly, there is a huge uncertainty of just how big that use will be. It will clearly play a major role, but whether it's 100 million or so, which we have, or 600 or 700 million, that is the huge uncertainty. If you focus not on the power issue, the storage within the power system, balancing the power system application, but we're on industrial and transport applications, then there is a much greater degree of similarity, sort of 500, 700 million tons by 2050. I spotted some differences between Kobad's figures and ours. Looks like we are more optimistic about what's going to happen in shipping. We think global shipping will be completely dominated by 2050 by either methanol or ammonia. We suspect ammonia, not methanol, but it actually doesn't make any difference to the demand for green hydrogen, because it's pretty much the same amount of green hydrogen has to go into a methanol-dominated global shipping industry as a ammonia one, about 80 to 100 million tons of green hydrogen to decarbonize global shipping. So there are specific differences, but we're both showing 500 million tons plus of end-use demand in multiple transport and industrial sectors by 2050. But we are both showing, and it was clear even on the left-hand chart of COBAD's figures, that by 2030, the industrial and transport demand is still relatively small. What drove the big increase in the 2020s in COBAD's figures was an assumption of a big role in the power system. Both of us suggesting a relatively slow takeoff in industrial and transport sectors. And that simply reflects the inherent challenges of slow capital stock takeover. Now, Malcolm earlier focused in particular on the importance of the steel sector. 1 kilogram of hydrogen in steel gets rid of 26 kilograms of CO2 emissions. And it's absolutely clear that we already know how to make green steel from hydrogen. I have in my hand 100 grams of green steel produced by SSAB at their pilot plant, their DRI pilot plant in northern Sweden. ArcelorMittal are planning to do the same very soon here in Spain. H2 Green Steel also planning to do the same in northern Sweden and in Spain. We know exactly how to make green steel. But even when all the companies in the world are committed to that, it just takes time to do a capital stock turnover. Or if we look at shipping, Maersk, biggest container shipping company in the world, has already placed an order for 8 major container ships using methanol, not heavy fuel oil. But if you take how long does that slowly work through the stock of all the global container ships in the world, we still might be only at 5 to 10 million tons of green hydrogen demand for the shipping industry in 2030, even if we're en route to 80 to 100 by 2050. So that brings me to the first of my 4 key implications. The first is, let's start focusing on demand, not supply. I think it is almost certain that the targets we're seeing of what will happen to electrolyzer prices and therefore to the cost of producing green hydrogen down to $2 a kilogram, down to $1 a kilogram, $1.50 a kilogram will be met. But even at those sort of prices, green hydrogen will only slowly displace installed bases of fossil fuel applications working off the marginal cost of capital stock which already exists. So we need strong policies to force early demand growth, such as the policies which India are bringing forward, and I know that Professor Arun Sharma will talk about later from Adani, to have mandates for a green hydrogen use in future and existing applications, because that is my second point. We need not only to focus on the new applications of hydrogen, but on the applications that already exist at the moment. As you can see from this chart, there is about 70 to 100 million tons of hydrogen used today. 70 million of it is traded in markets, 30 million is entirely captive and not on this chart. That is primarily in applications like refining, but also crucially ammonia for the fertilizer system. And we need to drive a rapid turnover of that gray hydrogen to green hydrogen in the applications that already exist if we are to get anywhere near 100 million tons of green hydrogen in 2030. We can't do it just on the new applications. Third, and I think it is an implication of COBAD's presentations and all of the Energy Transition Commission's works, with the costs of producing green hydrogen now almost certain to collapse, we need also to focus on the costs of storing it and transporting it. That is going to be absolutely crucial to the economics of applications. Fourth, and finally, and perhaps most important, again, it's a point that Malcolm made in his speech earlier this morning, we have to focus on the massive level of renewable electricity investment required to meet this growth in green hydrogen possible, alongside what we are also going to see, which is massive growth in direct electricity use. At the ETC, we believe that direct electricity use, which across the world is now about 27,000 terawatt hours, will have to rise to about somewhere between 70 to 90,000 terawatt hours by 2050 across the world. But if in addition we are going to produce COVID's 1,400 million tons of green hydrogen, that would require 58,000 terawatt hours of green electricity. Work it out, use 45 kilowatt hours per kilogram, roughly. We might get it down to 42 with really good technological progress, but we will need, on those figures, twice the current total global electricity production to go into green hydrogen. Even the 100 million tons by 2030 implies 4,500 terawatt hours. And when you look, as we have, at the investments required to build a huge green hydrogen economy, it is vital to understand that 80% of the total billions of dollars in investment do not lie in the electrolyzer plants or even the storage or the transport. They lie in the renewable electricity required to produce the electricity as input to those electrolyzers. And today, almost no country is building renewables at anything like the pace required. We know how to make entirely green steel. We know how to have entirely green container ships. We know how to totally decarbonize fertilizer production, but we are going to have to massively increase the amount of green renewable electricity produced across the world. And among all our talk of the green hydrogen economy, we need to make sure that policymakers are focusing on that overriding priority as well, because otherwise we cannot deliver our vital objectives. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So that's clear. So the theme of today is leading together in the green hydrogen economy. So we need some orchestration, but it's definitely sure that it is possible to scale up and to reach these ambitions. So please, Mr. Lacamera, how important is the green hydrogen certification and the standard in the pathway to decarbonizing the energy system?
Thank you, Nick, for your question and for presenting me. Thanks to Norbert for the excellent report. And allow me, before I react to your questions, to comment on the Bloomberg presentation. I already anticipated, it's a kind of joke that I repeat in every place where I can. So please don't think that I'm criticizing Bloomberg. That was the summer 2020, and I tried to understand how this hydrogen market will work. And I saw this report of Bloomberg say that green hydrogen will never be competitive before 2050, saying that it's only at that time it could be possible to have hydrogen to be produced by $2 per kilo. So I think today we have a very good progress because we moved from 2050 to 2030. So 20 years in 1 year, changing our prediction. This is to say that what we are assisting is something that we couldn't imagine just a couple of years ago. And this happened also when we are talking about renewables, where there were many said the renewables were going to be later in the future, and they come up on us, being now the most competitive way to produce power around the world. And concerning trade and costs, we are going to publish a new report this week as ARENA, and we will present in our collaborative framework. So I will leave you to that. And also on trade, in a few weeks, we will come with another report that will illustrate how green and blue hydrogen will work in the future, at least from our point of view on trade. And we have also published last January a report on the geopolitics of energy transition, focusing on hydrogen. I think that is one of the best reports that we have published in the last couple of years. And now I come to your question. So how important is green hydrogen certification and standards in the path to decarbonizing the energy system? So ARENA Works is global in its coverage. As you know, we are an intergovernmental agency that's now we have 168 members, 20 in the accession phase. So we are global, so our work is global. And our task is to facilitate the transition to renewable energy as the main component of the new future energy system. Part of the process is to be able to measure and quantify the greenhouse emission footprint on energy through a certification system. Many certification systems are already in place, and there is a growing interest in developing this for hydrogen, but this is complex exercise and we see much confusion still there. A certification system needs to create commercial value for its lowest carbon content. It needs to be transparent to show the unique benefits of renewable hydrogen too. Green hydrogen is renewable hydrogen that has been produced under the highest standard of environmental and social care. So also social care is important to understand if a production is green. We support this, but warn that condition for green hydrogen should not hinder its uptake and detract from the benefits of renewable hydrogen as the lowest carbon hydrogen. This will risk that it's become easier to develop less clear form of hydrogen. ARENA has a role to guide our members in this. We are not a standard setting body, but we are perfectly placed to advise what is needed in a certification system and make a recommendation to our member to address this issue. So I really welcome the idea that we can work together and bring the experience, your experience, into our collaborative framework and having a continuous dialogue with the government that are there with us and all the stakeholders. Because naturally getting consensus of this element is focus if you want to get really a result. Issues that are currently not aligned between existing and planned certification schemes include, at least is what my office say I have to say. Lack of a collaboration between countries in developing the parameters for hydrogen certification systems. Lack of uniform definition for the different types of hydrogen with conflict with, for example, the green financing taxonomy. Lack of uniform carbon content thresholds to ensure true emission reduction. Not all systems require verification that renewable electricity has been used to produce green hydrogen. No international established network of certifying authorities. No clear transfer of custody from upstream electricity guarantees of origin or to the end user or hydrogen derivative. To address this concern, under the auspices of a public-private platform, the collaborative framework on green hydrogen, we are doing a considerable amount of work in this area. We also have a focus on the implication on this discrepancy between certification systems for the G7 country and what is needed in their regulatory framework to close gaps and create a certification system that will allow trade of green hydrogen. We work with other global initiatives to ensure consistency, such as the work being conducted by the high-level champion, the Global Breakthrough, the IPHE, the Mission Innovation, and the Clean Energy Ministerial. We are working with some of our members to look at carbon accounting and how the current hydrogen certification schemes may impact hydrogen derivative with flow and on effects for green commodities and the industrial end user. We liaise with the International Electrochemical Commission, the global body that certificates electrolyzer, on terminology and conformity with hydrogen certification. We are on the Hydrogen Council Advisory Board for the development of a roadmap for robust certification system for hydrogen. And importantly, we have been together with the Green Hydrogen Organization in its work toward the Green Hydrogen Standard that is being launched at this event. We have been on the Expert Technical Standard Committee since day one. It is essential to have a global definition of green hydrogen. And closing, ARENA will continue to collaborate with its members to develop hydrogen certification systems that enable the trade of green hydrogen. And in conclusion, let me thank the organizer, not only for having me, but also giving me the chance finally to meet with many friends. I see many in this first line. It's been really a pleasure that I stopped to see my friend as a TV star, and we can shake and stay together and share our experience. So please, working together. There is the last announcement I want to say. ARENA will organize back-to-back to the Energy Transition Ministerial G20 in Indonesia, our first investment forum. Please come with projects. You can send projects to ARENA. We can try to facilitate the funding. This is also one of our recent tasks. So please working together for making transition happening. Grazie, grazie molto.
Thank you very much for addressing the importance of collaboration. So wonderful. Yeah, actually, we are in a hurry. We are in a climate crisis, so we are in a hurry. So how can we generate enough sufficient electricity, renewable energy capacity in time? That's the question.
Thank you, Nikke. So the question is actually not if, but how fast, right? Before I go directly to your question, allow me one word on the current energy crisis. This is the biggest crisis since the 70s, maybe even with larger impact, and it's truly global. Now, this has an accelerating factor and some warnings I would like to speak in 1 minute. The accelerating factor is obviously that the energy security driver is now stepping in with all its force, and it's an incredible push for energy efficiency, for renewables, and for green hydrogen, and all forms actually from low carbon fuels. At the same time, I would like not to under-evaluate it, that there are some concerns. The high energy prices, the high critical mineral prices, commodity prices, these are potential barriers that could be an obstacle looking at the outlook and forecast of that BNEF showed with and that we produce as well. We should not forget this, because this should be a priority for policymakers. Now, this is why my second point is I really 200% agree with what Lord Turner said before. Let's please now focus on demand. Let's make sure, I heard before, the market exists. We just need to go there and grab them. Okay, if the market are clearer, I think investors will be reassured. And I think we think this is a mixture of policies, from incentives. Minister Meza mentioned tax incentives, mandates like India is reflecting upon, and of course then standards in order to make sure that what we produce and use is really low carbon and is not greenwashing. But I repeat, one main focus for policymakers for this transition to happen quickly is to look at demand right now and to make sure that the signal is very clear. Let's see tomorrow with the Renewable Power Europe message what comes out, but for me this is more important demand than supply right now. On renewables, the IEA published the renewable market update last week, and in a nutshell the message is that despite the high cost, despite the supply chains, renewables are still there breaking new records and with showing an incredible resilience. Now, for a variety of reasons, and this is really good, we think we forecast 320 gigawatt of new renewables installation to be installed worldwide this year. To give you an idea, this is enough to supply the whole electricity demand of Germany. Or to give another benchmark, this is enough to produce the whole electricity produced in Europe from natural gas. Now, in this respect, if I look at the numbers of BNEF in the normal outlook, or even looking at the manufacturing capacity, the answer to your question is there is no problem. Even with the current market, the renewables markets are easy to satisfy this. But if we are in a net zero scenario, then the IEA sees a benchmark of 850 gigawatt by 2030 of cumulative capacity. BNEF shows 1,000. IRENA has similar numbers. It doesn't really matter, this difference. It's the order of magnitude. Then this is another story. It's a completely other story. And the key word in this respect is diversification in two dimensions. One is the location of the plants, because obviously green hydrogen has a unique feature. It unlocks the huge potential of renewables where there is supply, but there is no necessary demand for renewable electricity, because it creates new demand. It is a new way to linking renewables and hydrogen to new economic development opportunities. And this is a huge opportunity because it's an accelerator in itself, whether this happens in Africa, first of all, but also Latin America or certain part of the Asian Pacific region. The other part is the diversification and manufacturing. And here I need to be a little bit more precise. PV is an incredible success story. The PV installations in 2023 will be 200 gigawatt per year. This is another example of doubling every X years. But as you know, the production, in particular of some critical supply chain elements, is very concentrated in one world region and even in one country. Wind is more diversified. But the wind industry today, because of the energy prices, is suffering a lot. It's not making profits. It's not a sustainable industry. Hydropower, a crucial complementary technology that Honorable Turnbull knows better than anyone else, is still forgotten in the agenda of the policymakers. So my main message here in answering your question is having in mind that we need to have a sustainable renewable industry that makes reasonable profits is a precondition.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I have a question. Do we have a burning question from the audience? No, perhaps in a couple of minutes. Oh, yes. Is there a microphone over there? Almost, yes.
Thank you. When you mentioned the needs for unified standards and proper standards and not greenwashed ones, what do you mean exactly? What are the standards that can ensure that when we produce green hydrogen, we are not actually cannibalizing the electricity, the renewable power that we would need to directly decarbonize our power sectors, and we actually deploying additional renewables? How does the standards need to look like?
Yes, that's of course the discussion also in the European Commission the last months or years. So perhaps one of the gentlemen on the right, can perhaps Irina give a short reflection on this one?
So concerning the standard as such, I don't think that this could be something that may be considered. It's a question of policies. And what I'm seeing, at least in the European Union, is that for producing green hydrogen, we have to use electricity that is not yet produced, so that we install a renewable capacity that may feed the system. This is the way, at least, the European Union is tackling your question. And I think this is a wise way to deal with this, because we know that the demand of electricity, 30% in the years to come will go for producing hydrogen. So naturally, we have to be careful that we are not cutting the supply for power.
Yes, and of course we are in a hurry, and we have the hard to abate sectors. It's about the demand side we just heard about. How we have to orchestrate it from the production, transport, the storage, and of course the hard to abate sectors to really kickstart this hydrogen economy. Perhaps Lord Turner, can you give a short reflection on the on the question?
Well, I think we've heard a key answer to it, which is to make sure that the new green hydrogen is supported by new electricity supply. I think in most parts of the world, that may tend naturally to occur, because when we look at the economics of green hydrogen development, I think we'd like to see a very large amount of dedicated renewables going into them rather than grid electricity. There will often be grid connections to both sell surplus electricity and use electricity when needed, but with a very large a development of new dedicated renewables. But what I would say is this: I think it's really important. I know there is this debate about the optimal use of electricity. Should we use it for green hydrogen, or should we use it for direct electricity? But the fact is, we've got to do both, right? To get to a net zero economy, we have got to take direct use of electricity from around 20% of final energy demand to, the IEA says about 50, we're way up at about 60 or 65. Paolo, you'll catch up with us one of these days. Yeah? But it's way up there. We've got to have a huge increase in the use of direct electricity, but we've got to have about 15 to 20% of final energy demand coming from green hydrogen on top of that. And these are not either ors. You can't get to a zero carbon economy without doing both of those. So we mustn't get too fixated by this argument about, within our fixed amount of electricity we've got at the moment, what is the optimal use of it. Our absolute priority should be the policies which unleash the growth of the clean, green, zero carbon electricity system fast enough to support both direct electrification and a massive expansion of green hydrogen.
Yes, and part of your presentation was also about the cost competitiveness. Yeah, if you really want to upscale and create new renewable electricity, it is about the cost competitiveness. So can you please give a short reaction?
I mean, I agree very much with what Adair says. And I'll add another strand of thinking there. Building more renewable capacity and building it faster than our current rate adds a great degree of resilience and energy security to the system. So if you can imagine, if Europe had a more aggressive program of expansion of renewable capacity, European investment in renewables has sort of flatlined, if not gone up and down a little bit over the last sort of 5 years. They continue to roll out renewable capacity in advance of what the market's natural level of pull is. You'd be in a much better position now with this huge security disruption. And I think that's true around the world. I mean, the amount of renewable capacity we need in order to decarbonize the economy, both for the electricity grid, then the additional electrification that needs to happen in order to provide least cost decarbonization through the direct use of electricity, and then again another magnitude for hydrogen production. I mean, they are astonishing quantities, and we just have to get on with the job and start to build forward. So, I think that's incredibly important for policymakers, is not just to wait for market pull. We have to begin to build forward, and there's many benefits from doing that.
Yeah, so we have to scale up, and that's hopeful. Thank you very much. So we have another question here, and a lot of questions. It takes some time sometimes, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, pardon me. Quick question about technology. So everyone on the panel so far seemingly is talking about the existing world of electrolyzer technology, either PEM or alkaline. Yet it seems like every day we read something at either bench scale or pilot scale promising much greater efficiencies. Any thoughts from anyone on the panel as to how realistic, near-term, new technologies are for converting renewable electricity to hydrogen?
Yes.
I think there are new technologies out there, but let's just remember they can't be transformational, right? The thermodynamic limit is about 39 kilowatt hours per kilogram. We're already approaching, in real world applications, 45 kilowatt hours per kilogram. I know guys who are thinking of investing in a new technology which might get them to 41.5 kilowatt hours per kilogram, but you're never going to go a whole load beyond that because you are against thermodynamic limits, and thermodynamic limits are facts in the world. So I think it's important to realize if we're just talking about the efficiency in which you turn kilowatt hours of electrical power into the chemical energy in a kilogram of hydrogen, we can improve 5%, 10%. We can't improve 50%. It's just impossible. So we have to place that in context when we think about how important those developments are.
If I may just elaborate on this, of course, there will be new technologies and they will be important in the longer term. But the biggest priority is in this decade to replicate the success story of solar, to use existing technologies, to put economies of scale, use the learning curves and go the cost down and make sure that in 2030, green hydrogen is competitive with the alternative fuels. That's the real urgency. In the meantime, of course, invest in R&D to have longer term solutions. God knows what they will be.
May I express how happy I am that people finally say that we have to use the technology that we have, as we have been insisting for a long time, where people say that we need 50% of new technology for getting the results. So I'm quite happy and satisfied to hear with my eyes that we all believe that the technology we have can bring us to respect the 2030 target in line with the Paris Agreement. I'm very happy. I want to just share with you my happiness because I felt so lonely just 1 year ago. So thanks for being good company.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes.
Can I just add one other thing? Just technology you didn't talk about, but just came across my email yesterday and I was surprised by it. But there are people who think there are bigger natural supplies of hydrogen than we had realized, and that some of these are in geological formations at levels of concentration that might enable us to get them out of the ground at 60 cents per kilogram. Now, there are enough quantities of this that it would be very useful to develop it, but still not undermine the case for green hydrogen, produced hydrogen from electrolysis. But I think what we're going to see, we will just keep on seeing innovations and new ideas developing. We keep on coming up with them. I think we need strategies to get to net zero, which can get us there with the technologies that we know. And if then there is unexpected, currently unanticipated technology improvement along the way, which there will be, but I can't tell you what it is, that will just make it easier to get there than we currently think. But our strategy has to be to get there with technologies we already know.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's a good discussion, so thank you for the questions, but we have to wrap up, and I think it's all about the technique, it's about leadership. We don't have so much time, so we have to act now, and I think the question will be, how fast can we grow? Fast, if we will. Thank you very much.